Hey, this is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire. And if you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Denis. He's prepared to ignite.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis.
Hey, welcome to the show, Leadership is Changing. What we as leaders know to be true is that change is constant. Leaders everywhere confront similar obstacles because people are people, but everywhere you go, leaders are overwhelmed, disrupted, and under pressure. They run from email to email, meeting to meeting. Many leaders are not changing quick enough, which means they run the risk of becoming irrelevant and being left behind. Perhaps the show is taking our listeners' leadership to another level by finding their balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. I believe we don't have enough effective leaders in the world today, and if we can get the leaders to step up and lead change, then they can inspire real change. Hey listeners, it's now time to adapt in our fast-moving world. Hey listeners, welcome to the Ask Denis freestyle episode. Great to have you here with us again this week. This episode is where I'm asked a question by our listeners, or I share my thoughts, insights, and experiences from working with many leaders around the globe. Hey, if you haven't already, and if you listen to this on Apple, if you haven't already put a review or a rating, we would love you to do that. It doesn't take long, just takes a few minutes. Just about to go on and do it. Check on the podcast where you can put reviews and ratings. If it's a 5-star and you love this podcast, put a 5-star, put a review as well. We would love to see it coming through. Now, if you're listening to this on Spotify, you too can do a rating. They're not doing reviews at this stage, but they have just now started to launch, or they have launched, the ability to put a rating for the podcast on Spotify. Hey, we'd love you to do that because it really does help the visibility of the podcast. And so for some of you, you may have saw on social media recently how we were in the business management category, how we were number 5, and the ranking's really good. To get to number 1 is going to be a big thing for us to do. But I know that one day we're going to be able to do that and take it to number 1 in the rankings, which would be pretty cool. All right, let's get on today's episode. What I want to talk to you about is create the space to think. This is an interesting one. Well, for a lot of people, they are always on. They're always on. So they're going from email to email, meeting to meeting, as I say in my introduction of the podcast. And so for some people, it is always feeling like they're on. They don't even take time out. They might be taking time out, but they're thinking. Their mind is doing overtime. The phone's going ping, ping, ping. They're getting emails, text messages, and phone calls. But when we talk about the space to think, or creating the space to think, it's about a question that I want to ask you. When do you take time out in your day or your week to think? It's an interesting question, right? Because for a lot of you right now, you're probably thinking, Denis, I don't have time. Well, I'm here to tell you that that's just an excuse. We all know that we're all busy and that we have a lot on. But for leaders to be successful, they need time and space to think. So today, as we could talk about this, I'm going to come up from 2 different aspects. One is for you as an individual, and you actually making time to create that space to think. You, number 1, is the number 1 thing, right? Number 2 is a group of people that you may work with, the people in your team, your peers, and so forth, and how do you help create space for them to think as well? Now, for a lot of us, we can talk about that in meetings as well, and we're going to get into that very soon. But let's talk about you. Let's talk about you giving yourself the ability and the permission to create space to think. Now, if you could create that permission, that'd be pretty cool in allowing you to take time out to actually think about it. Now, how much time are we talking about? 5 hours? 3 hours? No, I'm talking about half an hour. You could take 1 hour at most if you want to do that on a weekly basis. But how about even if you took 10 minutes per day just to think about what you've got on that day and to think about things as well? See, you deserve the space. You deserve to give yourself room for you to think. Because when you do actually take time out to think, you will be more deliberate in what you do as a leader. You'll know what to do. You won't feel scattered. For some of you, you feel like you're in the clouds and you don't have any clarity. You feel overwhelmed and that things and more things are being thrown at you and you don't know how to cope. Well, I'm here to tell you this. Don't let the tail wag the dog. The dog needs to wag the tail. And that means us as individuals take control of what's going on. And if you can take time to create that space to think, then you're going to give yourself the ability to take control. And just imagine what could actually happen or what you could achieve if you could take time out to think, to plan, and to act. The number of people I'm working with that they don't take time out. It's really interesting to see it, and they actually are overwhelmed. And then they're wondering what's going on for them. Their work-life balance for some of them stinks. It is really bad. They're doing 60-hour, 80-hour weeks. They're working until 10 o'clock at night, midnight, and then having to get up early for 5 a.m., 6 a.m. calls. You know what? That's not sustainable. And something's going to break. Something's going to give. Now, for some of them, they're going home. In fact, for some of them, they're even working at home. But they're going home grumpy. And the family are wondering, what's happened to dad or mum? What's happened to my wife or husband or my partner? What's going on? And so for a lot of people, they are struggling. And all it can take is some simple time or create the space to think, and having time to do that can actually really help immensely. And so I'm going to really encourage you to take that time out during the week to think about things. Even if it means for you to go down to a beach or get into somewhere where it's nice and quiet, sit in the garden, go for a walk and think through things. Take notes if you can. If you've got a mobile phone, you can record your notes while you're walking along. You can be talking to it and making that happen. The biggest thing you can do, the biggest gift you can give yourself is the ability to create that space to think. Now let's look at the other areas. Let's talk about people around you. Now for some of you, you may have people in your life or in your team who are quite analytical. Now have you been into meetings where several things start to happen? Number one, you've got people who talk a lot in meetings. In fact, sometimes somebody has said something, and about 2 or 3 minutes later, somebody else says exactly the same thing, but they want it in their voice. They want to be seen as saying something. It's not actually adding any value because they are just repeating what somebody else has said. No one tends to pull them up on it. And if that happens, I'm going to encourage you to pull people up on it. To say, look, hey, you've just actually said what someone else has just said about 3 minutes ago. What are you actually saying? Well, what is it actually that you're wanting to get across? Because sometimes they may hear something and they use that other person's words, but they're still struggling to try and get their message across. So maybe help them out a little bit. But have you ever been in a session or in a meeting at times and you wonder, where's that person? Are they in the meeting? And if you look around the room or on the cameras in the actual meeting, if it's online, you realize they are in the room. Now, for a lot of people who are analytical, they're trying to get the word in. They're actually sitting back and thinking about what's going on and what's being said and being quite considered in what people are saying. But the problem they have is they can't get a word in because you've got all these other people who are speaking loudly and talking a lot and actually talking over each other. Now, if we can create the space for those analyticals to think when we're talking about things, what's really amazing is this. They tend to listen to everything that's been said, and then they say this one thing that is of so much value. It's the nugget. It's what stops everybody in the meeting going, they're spot on. But you see, we have to give them the space to be able to think. And we need to create that space in meetings as well. So if you ask a question, sit back and listen and wait. And if others try to speak, just hold the room, hold the meeting, hold that space to allow those people who are wanting to say something time to think. Because when they do say something, as I said just before, oh, wow, it is something to listen to because it's really, really awesome. Now, sometimes as leaders, do another thing as well. And it's in relation to others and creating that space for them to think. But you know what? It's like you and I walking down the street and then we see a friend of ours walking towards us and they go, hey, where are you going? Oh, we're off to the movies. We're going to go and see the latest Spider-Man movie. And they went, I went yesterday. Hey, look out for this piece and watch out what happens here. And it's really amazing when this happens. And what they tend to do is they tend to take away the experience for you of watching that movie. The way I call it is that they actually steal that experience from you. They take it away.
they take the opportunity away as well. So as individuals or as leaders, when we have people in our teams, in team meetings or in other meetings, or when we have a one-on-one with somebody, if we ask them the question, and it doesn't matter whether they're analytical or not, give them the space to think and answer. Now, giving them the space may be a little bit uncomfortable for you and them at first, but don't worry. They'll get used to it after a while because they'll know how it all works. And when they come up with something or they think about it, they feel like they've been respected. They feel like they're really precious or important because they've been given that space. And for you as the person across from them, nothing else matters except for the person in front of you. And by you creating the space for them to think, they're going to think that you're a great conversationalist. Don't rob them from the experience. Allow them to have the experience and ask the questions, sit back, listen, and allow them to experience it. Now, what do I mean by this? The number of times I'm about to say something to somebody and I bite my tongue a little bit longer, seconds, we're talking about 1 or 2 or 3 seconds longer, and then something they say, and it just pops out, boop, and they say it, and it's just like, whoa. Now, when they say it, it has so much more weight than if I told them. Now, I've got an episode out there, Ask, Don't Tell. I think it's episode 211. If you haven't already checked it out, check it out. But you know what? If I tell them, it's one thing. But when they say it, it is amazing. It's like it's the best thing since sliced bread. It's a great saying out there. It's a great invention, a great idea, what they actually have come up with. But you could have robbed them from that experience. So create the space for people to think and also allow them to speak. And if you can do that combination with people in one-on-one, with people in meetings, but also giving yourself the time to create that space to think, giving yourself the permission to allow you to do that, you, as a leader, will start to understand and know that you are in control. You will start to understand and see areas whereby you can take action that is more deliberate and it's more focused, it's more targeted, and you'll know where you're going. I think that if you can create that space to think, you will take your leadership and you will take your team and your organization to another level.
Hey, listeners, what we as leaders know to be true is that change is constant. Change is incredibly scary, especially with the unknown and unfamiliar territory. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing. Look out for the episodes as they're being released. Download them, have a listen, put a review and a rating. Feel free to share them with your friends, your family, and your network. Hey, if there's any feedback you'd like to give me about the show, or if there's a question you have for the Ask Denis Freestyle episode, then send me an email, dennis@leadingchangepartners.com. Hey, listeners, it's always a pleasure being with you. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Giannoutsas. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.